Well, I don't look at my watch anymore. I look at my phone to see what time it is. Go figure that. My name is Don Loringer. I'm the director of the Defense Critical Language and Culture Program at the University of Montana as part of the Mansfield Center. We're pleased today to talk to you about language and culture training, not just from the context of the Defense Department, mind you, bearing in mind that we do teach active duty soldiers in Indonesian, Korean, Modern Standard Arabic, Levantine Arabic, Persian. We have capabilities that we've used in Arabic, Pashto, and Dari. And soon we will add French to our repertoire. But today we're going to talk about the importance of language learning and cultural understanding. And there's several imperatives for that. And if you didn't have one before the political season that we've all witnessed unfolding in this country, you ought to have a few now because it's a pretty good example of how lack of cultural understanding, let alone language training and appreciation, can have huge impacts on our country and the rest of the world. I am joined today by really some very good friends and very distinguished presenters in their own particular specialty in this business. On my far right here we have Adjunct Professor Owen Sears. Owen, I will confess, like Ted Cruz, started out as a Canadian. I didn't say that. And he received his master's degree from the National Defense Intelligence School and also is a graduate of the Naval War College. Served for many years in the Defense Department as an analyst in DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, for the Middle East and Central Southwest Asia, and also has considerable expertise being applied here at the university, not only in that region of the world, but East Asia and of late as well Northern Africa for reasons that are probably obvious. We're also pleased to have Dr. Reza Ghaffar Samar from Tehran. Reza has recently came to us from Syracuse University as a PhD in linguistics from the University of Ottawa. He's published, he's a brilliant scholar, and he too, though he's relatively new, is a great friend to us and to our program. On my immediate left, or to your right, Dr. Abdelleila Boussaria, who's from Morocco. He is the head of our Arabic department, and Reza is the head of the Persian language department. Abdelleila, I've lost track of how many languages he speaks, but we test him to get the highest level of fluency, and thus far it includes Modern Standard Arabic, Levantine Arabic, and the two are quite different. French, I'd like to practice what little French I can speak with him, but he's totally fluent. Spanish, I've heard him talking Italian on the telephone, and I think it's just sort of frightening how many languages he speaks and how easily he does it. He also gives a lot of lectures, and we're going to use him much more heavily in the culture and regional studies part of our program. He joins us with lots of education, but a PhD from American University in Washington, D.C. as well. To my far left is the head of the academic program department for the University of Montana, Shaima Kanjani. I will confess that Shaima is virtually a member of my family. I encountered her 6, 7 years ago at a conference in Tucson, Arizona. And I'll tell you a little story about it. Well, first of all, she's a graduate of Ramapo College. She's from Afghanistan. And she got her master's degree at the University of Montana. And she's 3 courses away from her PhD at the University of Montana. I always like to tell a little story about Shaima. When I first met her, I was in a group of about 450 academicians and senior leaders involved in culture and language training for the Defense Department. And we were getting a live video feed from Afghanistan. And this Brigadier General, 1-star, was giving an overview that was kind of like a Rotary. It was an unclassified thing. It was kind of like a Rotary Club, speech. And when it was time for questions, he's up, of course, in the middle of the morning from his time, and we're all in the middle of the day. And when it was time for questions, this relatively petite young woman stands up to the microphone and said, "General, I really appreciate your comments, but I wonder if you realize that when you came to my country in 2001, you were welcomed as liberators. But every time there's a member of a family that's killed, that's innocent, the members of that family in that province, in that village, in that city begin to wonder." And you could almost hear this audible sucking in of wind in this room. And the general gave an answer to that question, and it was pretty much a Rotary Club answer. She didn't move. And she said, "Well, sir, maybe you didn't understand my question." And again, ask it in a very polite manner. Everybody kind of sucked in their breath again. She got a much better answer. And she got a standing ovation from that audience. I could tell you more stories about Shaima, about her personal courage in her home country. She's now a Montanan through and through. As I said, she runs this program, and is just a delightful, charming, academically skilled young woman. We're going to talk to you about language and culture training, and I don't want to just limit this to the Defense Department because that's not really the issue here. The issue is that one of the greatest impediments to language learning in this country is the fact that we're Americans. And we've taken this notion of American exceptionalism, and several people on this campus agree that American exceptionalism is a really good thing, and coupled that with the fact that we're a global superpower, the only global superpower, I guess one could say, in today's world, and that we didn't really need to learn other languages and cultures. So we see a tremendous degradation of focus in our educational institutions on languages and cultures. And I would argue that if you're going to go out and be in this connected world of ours, be it Twitter and migration patterns and Facebook and CNN, in this tremendously connected world of ours, we can no longer afford the luxury where only 28% of Americans have a passport. And that's a jump, I might add, because of the fact you now need a passport to go from Canada into Canada or into Mexico. It used to be you just had to slow down below 70 miles an hour to go into Canada. No, those days are gone. So we have to try to overcome this notion that it isn't important that we learn the languages and cultures of other people, and not to pick on journalists for them necessarily. But can you imagine being a professional journalist with the job of explaining the world to your population, to your audience? Now that's very doable if you're going to spend your career reporting the weather at Stevensville. But if you have aspirations beyond that as a journalist, you had better understand a language and culture in the rest of the world. And it isn't even necessarily important that where you're working in particular happens to be the language and regional area with which you're familiar. Because when you learn another language and culture, it fundamentally changes the way you think. The way you think about other people, the way you think about other countries. This is a national security issue for us, and it is a huge challenge. In the military sense, there of the billets in the Defense Department that are required to have people who are fluent in another language and understand a culture, only 30% of those billets or authorizations for people, only 30% of those are filled. And we could go on and on and on with other examples that are anecdotal, not the least of which is one of the greatest scholarship programs in the world for fellowships and for a bachelor's degree or a master's degree is the Boren program. And the University of Montana virtually has nobody that ever applies for it, and it's a free ride study abroad program. It's because we don't put a lot of emphasis on it. The people up here with me do, and they understand it, and are great tools to meet what I think is a compelling national security need, not just in terms of defense, but in terms of global competitiveness. American exceptionalism is a wonderful thing, but we can't let the fact that we're American interfere with the imperative of understanding other languages and cultures in order to continue to flourish in the world. So let me start this off with the real experts in this business. Owen speaks a little bit of about 15 languages, but he understands a tremendous amount of the world. So, Professor Owen Sears.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Don, for that introduction. I might add, before I begin, that there are a lot of Canadian connections in this panel. My colleague, Dr. Boasria, my colleague, Reza, and look, Don's originally from Havre, so, you know, you're almost in Canada, for that matter. But what I want to talk about today is based on my experience as an intelligence analyst for the DIA. As Don mentioned, my area of expertise was Iran. But I have to be ashamed to say in front of my distinguished colleagues here that my knowledge of Farsi is about so deep, even though I worked for the DIA for nearly 10 years. During that time, I received approximately 22 hours of Farsi training. Now, don't get me wrong. The intelligence community provides language training. They spend a lot of money on it. It's just not for everybody. So, for example, the priority is on the so-called collectors, all right? So what I'm talking about here, CIA case officers, you know, the people cloak and dagger overseas, defense attaches, signals intelligence translators, and other quote-unquote clandestine operators. They need to know the languages. A lot of them are gathering information. And that makes sense. The question comes down to analysis, though. And I would argue that this is often the most neglected part of the picture. The collectors, as I said, they obtain the so-called raw intelligence, reports from agents, intercepted phone calls, all the stuff that Snowden told us about. But the analysts are the ones who are supposed to, in theory, process the reporting, assess the validity of the reporting, compare it with other sources, assemble estimates, including a monster called the National Intelligence Estimate. Pick a country, pick an issue, there's probably been an NIE on it. So who theoretically uses this analysis, an NIE? Who looks at an NIE and uses it for something? Well, in DIA, we would categorize it into two areas. One is the policymaker. Read the National Security Council, the President of the United States, various officials in the Defense Department. And another user would be what we call the warfighter. They, in theory, again, read the assessments or get briefed on it. A lot of them prefer briefings than having to read it, and make the decisions based on that information. I mean, at least that's the theory. So in a sense, what I'm driving at is that analysts are supposed to be at the core of the process, right? They're the ones who are supposed to take this vast pool of information, work on it, knead it out, if you will, and then put it into a presentable format. And yet, in my experience in the intelligence community, the vast majority of analysts lack any relevant language training. So during my time at DIA, for example, we had one analyst fluent in Farsi, a native speaker from Los Angeles, who moved on to what's called the Foreign Broadcast Information Service, a service that translates foreign media. But he didn't stay with us. We're supposed to be experts in an area. And yeah, you can read a lot of books about an area. You can even travel to that area. Of course, Iran's an exception for most of us. But if you don't know the language, you don't know the area. And I'm convinced of that. At a minimum, a reading knowledge of the area is essential if you're going to be an analyst who's capable of assessing a foreign culture. And the official answer to this, because believe me, the poobahs of the intelligence community will tell you, we have this program, we have that program, we have spent so many millions of dollars on language training. And yet somehow it doesn't seem to filter down to the people who need it most. And they'll argue that, I mean, this is one argument, lack of resources. We just don't have the resources to do this. Or, and I've heard this before, look, we translate all the information that you need. All the press that you need is translated for you into English anyway. You don't need to have a foreign language. I heard that one. Here's my favorite story, though. 1995, DIA town hall meeting. The then director of DIA, who I won't name, gets a question from an employee in the audience. And I won't identify who that person is. But basically the question is, sir, what can you tell us about providing us more language training? And the response was, you don't need to know languages. You just need to count tanks. That person is now the director of national intelligence. So it matters. And what I'm getting to is another issue of critical importance. There's lots of what they call secret squirrel reporting, right? It's got the classifications. Ooh, you know, it's got to be extra secret, and so therefore it's got to be good. And sure, we had some of that. I would argue that most of it was garbage. We had some translations of Persian press, some, not all. But the fact is that the so-called open sources, and what I mean by this is everything from newsprint to biographies to memoirs to works by Iranian officials just doesn't go translated. And the motto is, if it ain't secret, it ain't worthwhile. And yet, after I left the intelligence community, and it's been 10 years now, I have seen how important open sources, especially untranslated ones, are to the process. In fact, the vast majority of what you would find in so-called secret squirrel was actually in an unclassed source. So analytical improvements are crucial. After 9/11, everybody sang a good song about this. We need to improve the intelligence community and our understanding of foreign cultures. And yet I would ask this question, of course it'd be a national security secret to answer it, but how many so-called counter-terrorist analysts in the U.S. intelligence community, there are probably over 1,000, how many of them speak Arabic? I bet you any money that the number is less than 5%, even now. What, how many years after 9/11? How can you understand Islamism, though? How can you understand the so-called jihadi ideologies if you don't understand the context that lies behind them? And that means you need to know the Arabic language. That means you need to know the culture. I'm not equating language and culture with terrorism, but in order to understand a phenomenon of a small extremist community, you need to know the languages. So why hasn't there been a fix? It takes time to learn languages. We have a government that doesn't have time, or they pretend they don't. And it takes an especially long time to learn the hard languages. And let's face it, without insulting anybody here who might learn French or Spanish, these are the ones that count. These are the ones that the National Security Agency tells you they need desperately. Chinese, Arabic, Russian, and Persian. It takes a long time to learn those languages. And the fact is, Your managers of analysts don't have that kind of time. My boss, former tank driver I might add, said, look, I don't want to lose an analyst to a 54-week language course in Monterey, California. That person's no good to me. That means that in my bureaucratic line and block chart, I've got so many people who I don't have access to. And then, of course, this person also questioned the utility of it. Expanding just a little bit before concluding, the language problem extends to academics, by the way. I've learned that since I got out. Take Iran, for example. There are reams of Washington, D.C. so-called experts on Iran, and I'm not going to name any names, who author numerous books. They're all on the I guess, bestseller list is a relative term. And yet, look at the endnotes. That's what I always do. Look at the endnotes and find out how many of those sources are in Persian or Arabic. 0. They don't speak the languages. They don't read them. So how am I supposed to take what they're saying as experts at face value? So an old quote from a former CIA case officer. And this gets to some of the pejorative issues. Why bother learning Arabic, he said. It takes years. You never master it. And when you can actually read it, it opens doors to an empty room. This person saw no utility in it. And I would argue that this person wasn't looking hard enough. So my summary is, echoing what Don mentioned, our country just doesn't value language training, period. Our universities don't value language training, period. It's not just a civilian problem. As I mentioned, it extends to our national security community, the people who are supposed to know this stuff. And yes, we have a small cadre, of trained language experts, diplomats, case officers, the people with the earphones listening to the conversations. But you also have a vast number of people who are supposed to, in theory, speak truth to power, who don't understand the languages that they're supposed to be experts in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Owen. And you're right, Havre is pretty short drive from Canada. So our next speaker, Dr. Reza Ghaffar Samar, is the newest member of our faculty. He was educated in Iran, and he's one of my new favorite people in the world. And I always try to throw favorite people a little bit off guard. So if it isn't in his remarks, I'm going to ask him to explain to you why in Persian there's 2 words for ant.
I'll do that. Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm going to speak more about language and culture. And the importance of culture in understanding the language itself and communicating with people all over the world. Okay, it works. Just imagine, okay, so you hear that. Just imagine if in Iran you say we have a senator who is a farmer. Nobody will believe you. Because a farmer is usually an illiterate person with a few sheep, a piece of land, many kids, living in a small village. But Senator Desta, Don introduced him as a farmer. So if I come to the US and speak of farmers in Iran, will you understand that? I don't think so. If you do the same thing in Iran, nobody will believe you. Because the importance of the relationship between language and culture rests on this view that the semantic distinctions, the words we use, the meanings we try to convey, reflect different interpretations of reality. The reality of farmer for me is totally different from the reality of farmer to you. Like the example of ant Don mentioned. My mother's sister is totally different from my father's sister. I love my mother's sister more. Believe it or not, that's the case. She is closer to me. I can tell my secrets to her. But my father's sister? No. Never secrets. Once or twice a year, invited. That's the kind of relations expressed in my language, not in your language. I translate khale and amme in Persian into just one word in English, and you don't get it. You translate it, I don't get it. I don't get, why don't you marry your cousins? But in my culture, cousins are so close to you. The first option for a girl to marry is her cousin. So, these are the semantic distinctions we make. And this is the thing that makes languages sometimes impossible to be translated. Many people, many experts believe that you can't translate languages. Impossibility of translation. And because of this, I quote Guardian, which in a very nice paper showed that sometimes the problems with the US administration is that they don't understand what Iranian people say, Iranian statesmen say. That's because of these misinterpretations or mistranslations or misunderstandings because of the relationship between language and culture. I'm going to give you just one example, a very important one. Just imagine what you mean by negotiation in English. The meaning, according to Webster Dictionary, is you discuss a matter, you settle it, and you have a compromise. Right? That easy. So you have a conference, a discussion, or something, and at the end you have compromise. And compromise and concessions are inseparable from negotiation in English-speaking world. So you give something, you take something, and at the end you have somewhere in the middle, you agree, you have a compromise. And you always expect people from the Middle East to do the same thing. Right? Give and take and compromise. But in Persian, negotiation doesn't mean such a thing. It means just conversation. I'm quoting two very important major dictionaries of Iran, Persian. Conversation is, negotiation is conversation about something. So you go on and speak about something, and you converse. That's the meaning of negotiation. And if in a negotiation you get to some kind of compromise, then you are a compromiser. And what does that mean? To compromise means to deal with the enemy, to betray, to backstab. Can you do that in a negotiation, in a conversation with enemy? Can you have a compromise? So compromise, for me in my language, is surrender to the enemy. So what should we do according to my culture to have some kind of negotiation, sometimes to solve a problem talking to each other? You have compromise, I have sacrifice in my culture, in my language. When you negotiate, you should have sacrifices, not compromise. Then, who is supposed to sacrifice? It is a good thing, but it should be mutual. Who is going to begin it? Not me. Because if I do the sacrifice first, I victimize my own side. Then I have a compromise. Then again, surrender. I can't do it. Right? Maybe because of this, we had 10 years of negotiations with the US P5+1. with no compromise, no middle ground, no results. From my point of view, I'm going to criticize my own people. Not criticize, but express the facts. Why did this happen? Maybe because our negotiator at that time, Dr. Jalili, was a very nice person. He did his PhD in a university in Iran in which they teach English and Arabic intensive courses. Everybody in this university learns English, but English from Persian culture point of view. And this person speaks English, and he negotiated in English many times. But his understanding of negotiation was not negotiation from English culture point of view. It was from Persian culture point of view. Because of that, I'm quoting him. We want to discuss the fundamental problems of global politics at Istanbul talks. He always discussed it, and he always was satisfied. You see, Iran sees progress at talks. Others don't. So negotiation from my cultural point of view is discuss matters, important matters in the world, with no compromise. Then, when you change the person in charge, then when Dr. Zarif starts negotiations, since he has learned language with culture, not without culture, he knew what negotiation was, and he knows what negotiation is. After those marathon negotiations, then we had some kind of compromise. But that compromise, from your point of view, not my point of view, from my point of view, we made you sacrifice something. You sacrificed first, then we sacrificed something. So you see, when you have language with culture, you understand each other, then you have these kinds of things. And sometimes these misunderstandings are important. Just imagine, for the first time, Iranian media reported Mr. Zarif calling John Kerry as John and Kerry calling him as Javad. John and Javad, imagine. Yeah, these are the cartoons. And finally, Zarif was summoned to the parliament to explain. Are you calling your enemy as John? And he calls you Javad? You are so intimate? This is because of knowing language, not the culture. So if you combine language with culture, then you have negotiation, compromise, understanding, agreement, and solutions. When you don't have language with culture, then you have problems. You converse, you discuss, with no mutual understanding or no agreement. Because of this, I love working with Don, because he tries to combine language and culture with each other. Because he tries to make people understand each other. You don't need to learn Persian perfectly to understand Persian language and Persian culture. An elementary Persian speaker with some knowledge of Persian culture can understand people, can understand Persian, can have agreements and understandings. If you know Persian completely without understanding Persian culture, you are not a multicultural person. You can't understand Persian. You laugh at some cultural stuff in Persian. You just don't understand it. But if you do understand the culture, then we can have agreements. We can call each other as that gentleman told me. I'll call Americans as evils, and Americans will call me as terrorist, and we will laugh. Right? Because we do understand the cultures. We speak just a little bit of language, but we don't understand the cultures. That's the importance of culture. Thank you so much.
Oh, I just wish he was available to give that lecture to some political candidates I can think of, but but I won't go into that. This next gentleman, Dr. Abdullah Busaria, who's from Morocco, that's going to speak with us. I'll brag about him a little bit. As you can see, we're thought of as kind of the gold standard in language and culture training in the program we do, and it's because of the faculty we have, and some of them are in the audience as well. But we started a program whereby important national security issues are being discussed all over the country, and we have a captive audience in Helena with Governor Bullock, his cabinet, and members of the different state agencies, the DEQ, DNRC, the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, etc. So we started a program where periodically, once every couple of months, we'll send somebody up there to give them a presentation on an area of expertise that we have in the DCLCP or the Mansfield Center, or perhaps a area of expertise that is held elsewhere at the university. And I think 3 days ago, Abdullah has returned from Helena, where he gave a presentation which I heard rave reviews about on ISIL and ISIS and Islam. We've done a number of similar type events. The university is going to do one on American Indian health issues, Native American health issues in about 2 months. But I'm not sure which language of the many he speaks he's going to give this presentation in, but Abdullah Busaria.
Thank you, Don, for what you do here for Montana and for the United States. Really, it's a great work, and thank you all for being here. To echo what Dr. Reza was saying, also in Arabic, we have a different word for aunt from the mother's side and the father's side. Arabs and Persians are always constantly, is it the Persian Gulf or the Arab Gulf? Well, it is a Gulf. You know, that's what brings us together. So basically, not only that, actually there is a saying attributed to the Prophet of Islam, خَوِّلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ, which is in an imperative form, meaning aunt your sons. Of course, in English, the word aunt or uncle doesn't translate as a verb, but there is a verbal form of that in Arabic, which is, although it is in the imperative form, what it means is that kids generally will have this tendency of genetically, in terms of their features and in terms of their characteristics, to be closer to the aunts from the mother side. So that's also very, very important to mention. Before I started teaching and joining sort of the education train, I worked for Voice of America, Arabic section, Radio Sawa, to win the hearts and minds of the Arab world. And of course, needless to say that for both hearts and minds, language is very important, is very crucial. And that is what I will be talking about today. You will forgive me if I have a scripted speech because I tend to digress. And when I digress, sometimes I transgress. It was the 16th of February 2016, just after Valentine's Day, when a black and red banner with a message written in Arabic was spotted at the Citizens Tower building in downtown Lubbock, Texas, a site under construction to become the new City Hall. The mayor of Texas called, rightly so, for local and federal investigations to decipher the message of banner, which read, Al-Hubbu lil-Jami', love for everyone. The banner has since been taken down, but no one knows who put it up. Besides the charged legal connotation of trespassing in this case, what we can infer from it is the importance of language and cultural intelligence in a world that has become very interconnected. If it is true that globalization is squeezing us all into one language, that of the tablet and the instant messaging, it is equally true that globalization is only making it crucial for us, universal seekers, to understand one another in order to live in peace and harmony in a world where resources have to be shared in order not to be depleted. We at DCLCP integrate language and culture in opening the eyes of our finest men of service to a reality that is often multi-layered and complex to grasp without the help of a facilitator who is versed in both worlds, that of the input and that of the output. The man of the elite that seek our expertise in order to make their landing smooth can look in to sharpen their tongue. They come out not only with what they wished for, but also with a sense that clings irreversibly to any tongue taste. Upon graduation, our students, and we are their students too, acquire the nuanced taste of the bitter and the sweet of Arabia, and gestures that were previously gibberish to them start relinquishing the fragrance of their layers of meaning. And then, depending on the will and the openness of the seeker, the ship will dock at the port of a foe cordially understood, or sail in the ocean of a friend candidly embraced. Retired United States Army General and former U.S. Central Command Commander John Abizaid, whose parents immigrated from southern Lebanon during the late 19th century, had said, "Everybody needs to understand that I learned Arabic from the United States Army as a second language. I never spoke it at home." At DCLCP, we lay the bricks of that which everybody needs to understand through the linguistic and cultural empowerment of our dedicated men who put themselves in harm's way to protect a nation, a flag, an anthem, and a fought for liberty. It is to them that it serves us to talk regarding the copy of the Quran that the founding father, Thomas Jefferson, the third US president, kept in his library. If their appetite craves for more historic carbs, we let them know that that Quran was the second edition of a 1734 translation by George Sale, and it was this Jefferson's copy that was used by US Representative Keith Ellison to take his oath of office. It takes a great deal of honesty not to quench the thirst of our armed forces only with romanticized history that might jeopardize their mission with a player who is keen on exploring the flip side of the coin. And it is then that we resort to the historical chapter of Jefferson's war with the Barbary States, when he had inquired through Tripoli's envoy to London, Ambassador Haj Abdurrahman, about the slave trade of Americans and Europeans by the Barbary States. The ambassador answered, as reported by Christopher Hitchens, that the right was founded on the laws of the Prophet and the Quran, and that it was in their duty to make war upon them. The key lesson here is that Arabic, one of the critical languages we teach at DCLCP, cannot be separated from the cultural womb that gave birth to it. It cannot be disassociated, except perhaps in the legitimate references to pre-Islamic Arab poetry by writers like Taha Hussein, from Islam. And the Quran, as it is a reality for the believer in Islam, lands into which we deploy that the majesty of the language of the Quran recited by an illiterate man is considered a divine, flawless miracle to be carried across spaces and times. That reality doesn't have to be believed, but it has to be understood by our soldiers when they deploy. Hence, the novice that comes to us immersed in a monoculture that seldom walks the extra mile to understand the speaking in tongues so required by our day and age will slowly open up to the window of opportunities offered by high context cultures where meaning is highly contextual and where speech is often implicit and grounded in symbols and embellishments. It takes a great deal of patience and finesse to transpose a soldier embedded in strict schedules and fixed routines to learn a language that borrows nonlinear roads with its signposts of tangential imagery and meaningful repetitions. Arabic is ranked among the top 6 major languages in the world, belongs to the Semitic group of languages which include Hebrew and Amharic. It is generally divided into 3 subparts: classical Arabic, language of the Quran and poetry; modern standard Arabic, newspaper and news; and of course dialects. And now between dialects and modern standard Arabic, we are witnessing the emergence of what is called Middle Arabic. From the get-go, an Arab has to deal with linguistic duality between standard Arabic studied in school and colloquial Arabic spoken at home and in the streets. The Quran speaks about a clear Arab tongue, lisanun Arabi mubin, and Muslim rituals like prayer or Hajj can only, in orthodox Islamic views, be performed in Arabic. and many Muslims believe that Arabic is the language of paradise, hence the importance of learning it. The passage from language to dialect is an arduous task that we take time and dedication to fasten and secure, as it goes from acoustics, like the letter qaf, which turns in the dialects into either a or ga, or the letter tha, which turns into ta or sa in the dialects. So for the word thalatha, meaning three, it's pronounced either talata, let's say in Morocco, or salasa in Sudan, or the J becoming a ya in Kuwait. So that's in terms of acoustics. In terms of grammar, we know that there is a grammatical rule in MSA when the nature of the gender of the noun is masculine, the number that precedes it has to be feminine, so it's the opposite. But when you go to the dialects, there is a derogation to that. Sometimes in some dialects we have new words, like tubarji for construction worker, or kundarji in Levantine Arabic for shoemaker, repair, as we clearly see the suffix ji, which points to an occupation and which Arabs borrowed from the Turks, according to most researchers. Some of these dynamics are not specific to the Arabic language or dialect, as we see similar patterns in other languages, like with the procedures of permutation, which also in Arabic means heart, qalb, like tajahud, tahajjud, or as it is with African Americans, to ask or to ax, or that of keeping the contraction, like shaddait al-habl, I tighten the rope, when the correct form in MSA is shaddattu al-habl. In this linguistic gumbo, to breathe the southern air, for instance, handling successfully the right dose of mixture between MSA and dialect requires the eye not only of the beholder, but also the molder, the heart not only of a fighter, but also of a writer, and the taste not only of a brigadier, but also of a sommelier. It is from this linguistic vineyard that we at DCLCP seek to teach both language and culture, MSA and dialect, and we always find out the motivation of our students in order to see what linguistic skill we will hone in them. If the motivation is holistic, they can delve into the intricate mazes of Arabic prose and poetry. And if their mission is specialized, the linguistic context will be adapted to their needs. Not only do we teach our special forces the tricks of the tongue, but the lingo that we serve them comes packaged in intercultural competency. And of course, as you know, intercultural competency is a whole field that has its own rules. A language is not born in a vacuum, but is shaped by its cultural set, composed of history, myth, religion, arts, and geography. Hence, Arabic is the language of the Quran, and in Arabic we find more than 600 synonyms for the word lion or horse, like the Eskimos with snow, and also many words for love, like shaghaf, huyam, ishq, libas. The Quran talks about your wives as your garment, while husbands as garments for wives, and wives as garments for husbands. In Arabic, if you like something, you would use the expression aslaja sadri, which translates into it had made my heart frozen. The same expression in French, it would be ça m'a réchauffé le cœur. It had made my heart hot. Because while Arabic was primarily associated with the heat of the desert, requiring cooling down for comfort, French was associated with cold climate, where heat is the source of comfort. Cancer treatments, interestingly so today, have also adopted both ways. In cryosurgery, you freeze the bad cells in order to kill them, but in microwave radiation, you heat up the cells in order to kill them. The verb to be is hardly found in Arabic. Like, for example, the boy is sick. In Arabic, it's just the boy sick. Because the ontological premise here is that only God exists, and we only exist by and through him or her. The word jaun means both black and white, in defiance of binary logic, and it is only the context of the sentence that will demarcate or single out the color. Ibn Abbas, and I'm finishing, one of the main Islamic theologians who wrote commentaries of the Quran, had said, I didn't know the meaning of the verse, Fatir as-samawati wal-ard, the creator of the heavens and the skies, until I heard an Arab woman say, Ana fatartu, meaning I started it. Adding, if you do not understand anything from the Quran, seek its meaning in poetry. And of course, there are other verses in the Quran that sort of condemn poets and poetry, so we have to put things in context here. In this field where gestures complement words, we will always find enthusiasts and skeptics, like when our President Barack Obama became the first president in 88 years to visit Cuba. The cheering crowds welcomed this much-needed rapprochement, be it for the sake of expanding our markets or pivoting our docking sites. And the meeting with Raul Castro became a traveling photo shoot. The skeptics, on the other hand, either picked on the poor Cuban human rights records or on the timing of the embrace. And some even commented on the semiotics of the presidential ever-present gesture of shoulder tapping, interpreting it as gestural domination. Raul Castro himself did not let our president, that evening of March 21st, put his hands on his shoulders and sort of met him halfway. The intercultural lesson here is that even hugging is riddled with the innuendos of intercultural cryptology. A kiss is never just a kiss. From Baghdad to Tokyo, passing by San Francisco, the touch always needs an interpreter. I do remember when I had to take out my 17-month-old kid from the daycare in Missoula because the director told him, despite the credentials in education, to toughen up as he was no baby. Being constantly hugged and kissed, my baby reciprocates with similar gestures. Had we listened to the culturally blind advice, my kid would have then toughened up too prematurely for his innocent age, only to reach the stage of dating, finding himself constantly reminded, oftentimes by the same voices that asked more virility of him, that he is no more than a male chauvinist pig. And we wonder why we have shootings in our schoolyards. I just watched and said, listen, kiddo, if Jesus told us to turn the other cheek, maybe there is somebody on the kissing end that is willing to kiss that cheek. The road less traveled is generally the one that saves us from mediocrity, but it requires a lot of patience and endurance, and most importantly, as the Navajo sand painters would teach us, learn how to let go when the compass plays on us some tongue-twisting tours. Travelology from Ibn Battuta to Estevanico is endemic to the Arab world, and Sindbad, like Ulysses, took risks to explore new lands. Mark Twain had said once, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And many of our people need it surely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. We have come a long way from traveling on donkeys and mules to cars and trains to planes and boats. And today, the internet highway or skyway offers itself as a medium to teach languages for and to all willing skywalkers. But as the legend goes, more so in a multilingual habitat, the path to the Tower of Babel requires the guidance of Master Yoda, lest a Darth Vader brings in a false note in the cultural choreography. As someone who left Morocco at the age of 18 to live in 4 different countries, readjusting my dashboard as the speed limit kept changing, I have crawled and walked. I have fallen and rose again, but I keep always learning that from the cradle to the grave, the word was the beginning and it will be the end. Thank you. Wow.
If you don't learn anything else today, you'll get the idea, and there's several others in the audience, you'll get the idea of why, for me personally, to walk into my office complex or a learning center and be with these people is one of the greatest thrills of a lifetime. They're just awesome, so thank you for that. And now the young woman that's going to speak to us, Shaima Kenjani, and I see her husband just came in. Smart move, Faiz. Dr. Aklam. Shaima, who's responsible for sort of being the line tamer for this operation in the academic programs, is going to speak to us. Shaima?
Thank you very much, everybody. Well, after such a profound talks, I don't know what I say, from where to start, but I'd like to continue the story of Hama, our aunt. So in Afghanistan as well, we have two words for aunt, khala and amma, the same as Persian language. So like Dr. Reza said, yes, socially, emotionally, and we are closer to our mother's sister. And that's because of our mother's relationship with her sister-in-law, which is our aunt. So sister-in-law is seen as a second mother-in-law to our mothers. So that's why we are closer to our khala, to our mother's sister. But legally, so our amma, our aunt from father's side, so legally she is closer, because in our birth certificate we carry our father's name only. So our aunt from father's side would say, well, no matter, be closer to your khala, but look at your birth certificate. My father and your grandfather is one person. So that's another cultural and legal context behind this relationship in our culture. So my colleagues talked about the importance of language and culture, and they emphasize on how important it is for the soldiers, for everybody to learn the language and the culture as well. So here at the University of Montana, the Defense Critical Language Culture Program, Mansfield Center, we teach the language. And from this presentation, you can tell that the complexity of teaching language and culture is putting more responsibility on administrators to teach language and culture in a way it's taught in the target countries. So nowadays, with the emphasis from Department of Defense, considering the language and culture essential to the first century national security challenges, an essential key for military personnel overseas, and also as a very important issue to overcome the national security challenges in the United States. So a lot of different funding through Department of Defense are allocated for the military personnel so they can learn the language and the culture. But one thing has risen through this is that in most places, the teaching language and culture is seen as a business. So it's treated as a business. So here at the University of Montana, we teach language and culture differently, and that's why we are one of the most successful language training center, and this is what Department of Defense calls us. So what we do here at Defense Critical Language Culture, few points, how we teach the language and culture. So first of all, we teach the language and culture as it is taught in the target language, in the target countries. We don't invent a language here. What do I mean by that? So some language training centers, let's say, they gather few people, no matter their education background, no matter how long they have not been in their target countries. So they just put a group of people together on, in this case, I'm giving an example of Hazaragi dialect in Afghanistan. So Hazaragi dialect or Herati dialect in Afghanistan, it's always a spoken language. There is no written format of that language. So some language training centers, so just to compete in this business, they just put a group of people together here. Hey, just put a written format of Hazaragi dialect or Herati dialect. Then they put it on the paper, they publish the book, and they advertise it. Here, we offer one more language, two more languages. So we don't do that at the Defense Critical Language and Culture Program. That's one of the key components of our program. The second part of our program is we hire people who knows the culture and the language. You see an example of the people we have on board today in this panel, and we have several of them here in our audience. And it's not easy to get these people. It's the management, it's the leadership of the university and the Defense Critical Language Culture and Program and the Mansfield Center that puts this effort together to get the right people here to teach the language. Because the market demand is to teach more for less. And also, the people who learn language, they don't have enough time. They want to learn more in short time, which makes the language instructor's job even tougher. So also at the Defense Critical Language and Culture Program, we facilitate the learning. We don't lecture on language. So it means facilitating a language requires a lot of prep work, a lot of knowledge on the language and culture, and a lot of work off class. So our faculty really prepare very well before they walk into the class, so that they don't spend a lot of time on explaining grammatical point and talking in English and talking about the language rather than teaching the language. So this is another key component of our program. So we teach military personnel, so they need to learn the language quicker, and they need to learn the real life language, the language they can practice on the ground, the language they can communicate with the people on the ground. So we have communicative approach at DCLCP. So in line with pedagogy philosophy of communicative approach. So we teach them, we develop scenarios, we develop teaching materials that meets that need. So they learn the language the way they should be able to communicate. Whereas some other organization, they have a box, they have a template. They teach a student just through the box, learn this, 1, 2, 3. So when a student walk out from that class, they cannot practice their language in a natural way with the native speakers. So this is one of the approach we have at DCLCP, communicative approach and teaching real life word language to our student. And with the communicative approach, really, I talked about the outside class preparation. Our faculty tries to facilitate the language and also educate our students on the current event, what is going on in the world, in the target language when they are in an intermediate, high, and advanced level. So our students will talk about the news event, and they don't only talk about it, but they also express their ideas. They talk about it from pros and cons. And this approach in the classroom creates a very relaxed environment that encourages a student to practice their language in a very natural way, rather than just looking at the book and just saying what the book says. This is what we do. Another key component of our program is that we teach the language. We don't teach the test. So going back to the marketing aspect of the teaching language, most organization has a list. So like, what does it take a student? Our students take oral proficiency interview, and they are rated starts from 0 to 0+ and going on up to 4, which is the native language speakers. And there is a list developed by Defense Language Institute, which says a student who is a 0+, what are the language that he can speak? So most organizations just takes that list and just memorization, just teaching like a machine, like a robot. Say 1, 2, 3, repeat after me, memorize it, you got it. You're gonna pass the test and you get raised, and I have the proud, my student achieved the goal. So we don't teach our student the test. We teach them the language in a very natural way, so they are able not only say those words that are on the list, but also be able to communicate with people in a very natural way. So these are the few core components that we incorporate in our teaching at the Defense Critical Language and Culture Program, and which under Don's leadership and other faculty at the University of Montana make us one of the most successful language training center in the entire United States, and we are very proud of it. And I like to mention one more about our faculty. So yes, they are the native speakers of the language. They are highly educated. They are educated in the United States and in their countries, and they are trained on both cultures. They understand. If you cannot teach your culture if you don't know American culture, if you don't know how they see things. So this is the key component, another key component that our faculty has. And I work very closely with all of them, and I am very proud to say that they have this commitment for teaching their language and their culture, and this is something you cannot buy it with money, and this is something it's very rare to find in people. They don't do this job only for making a living. They have the passion about it. I have a family member who lost his life because of this job, translating for the United States military in Afghanistan. He lost his job. He was killed. And myself, as someone who grew up during the war in Afghanistan, I never remember a moment of my life in my country where I didn't have to worry about safety and security. So I am a generation of war. I grew up in war. So for me, being involved in this program and teaching the language and culture, I'm contributing to the world. I teach the language, and I'm involved in teaching the language because language is, for me, is a language of peace. And what language and understanding the culture is more important than carrying a gun with you. Whatever you can do with language, you cannot do it with your gun. So I'm very proud to be part of this program, and thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Shyma, and thank you for your courage and your leadership. I actually started to almost tear up a little bit because, there's no assigned seating here today. And as I sit out and look at the audience, I look back and I see the Indonesian, Korean, Arabic, and Chinese faculty all sitting together because they're all friends and they understand one another. And I look in front of me and I see the Korean and Chinese faculty sitting together. And we're just one small part of this huge challenge we have in the world, and huge global challenge we have as a nation. But if I had to put my finger on something we're trying to accomplish, that would be it. So thank you for that. Sanyap's sitting over there by himself, but that's because he's going to run the microphone in case any of you have questions. He didn't know that until just now, but we do have some time. Would anybody have any questions? There's a microphone there, or we have one up here we can pass around, and any of the panel members would be happy to ask it. Michelle.
Hello, hi. Sorry, I missed the first two communication.
Not a problem.
I had to teach. I have two quick questions. One, are you familiar with the RACIAS method, which revolutionized foreign language teaching in America about 20 years ago? He was a Greek faculty, he passed away now, teaching in the East Coast, and his method was a bit from what you described, the same, holistic immersion, concatenation of language, linguistic rote within examples. I mean, no English, I don't know, his name is RACIAS, you may know. And the second question is a bit more ontologic. What would you say to the critic, and I'm not saying they are right, but when you hear that by teaching critical or strategic language, strategic says it all, you are sleeping with the enemy, to use the title of the movie set in Seattle. How do you defend yourself? How do you react? How do you articulate, or how do you nullify that criticism?
And that
is that a fair question? Or
yeah, that would be a question for the
yes.
That faculty actually teaching
right.
it. Well,
yes, correct.
Let's Let's just go down the line here. That's a good question. And if any of you other faculty members out there want to jump in on that one, go ahead.
I didn't get the first question very well, but my colleague will answer that question. Your second question, teaching the critical language would be considered like to most people in our native countries that we are allying with enemies. Yes, that's true. In my case, in Afghanistan, and that's one of the reasons I cannot go back with this job, because I will be killed right away by Taliban, and I'm a traitor. I'm considered a traitor for Taliban and for most religious group and some tribal people there. But to me, in a practical context, when we taught a lot of students who right away deployed to Afghanistan, and they are still in contact with us, and they call us, and they send us email from Afghanistan, and they tell us stories how they use their language, and how easy it was for them to establish rapport and establish connection with the natives, with the locals in the villages and all that. Those stories tells a lot to us, and it really matters to me. And like I said before, hearing back from our student who goes and how they use their language. So to me, I am contributing to the peace building in the world through teaching the language and culture. Yeah, most people who are enemy like Taliban who don't see it this way, but there are a lot of things they see it differently. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I always like your questions. They always have a psychoanalytical grounded twist to them, and that's very interesting. The Ghazias method, I don't know about it. We do the communicative approach, which is basically sort of task-based learning approach, but I'll look it up. Thank you. I mean, we never cease to learn. The second question is very interesting, sleeping with the enemy. Yes, also in the Arab world, it is sort of very popular and very trendy. But I mean, my answer to that is first, the whole purpose to stop seeing him or her as the enemy. So I mean, that is the first approach. I mean, we don't want to see the person as the enemy, and hopefully we don't want the enemy to see us as an enemy. So, well, we control one part, we don't control the other, but hopefully we just cross our fingers. And so the second thing that's important in terms of this narrative, if we don't sleep with the enemy, somebody else will. So I give you the example of the Defense Language Institute. At the Defense Language Institute, a lot of Arabs coming from Coptic Egypt, they transpose the Coptic problems in Egypt into the soldiers. And while I do recognize that Christian Copts are sort of marginalized in Egypt, and actually one of the champions of their rights, but bringing soldiers that have no clue in the context of that and only making that soldier from Kansas just arbitrary picking, no picking on Kansas, but to bring that person and give them as the only truthful reality, that reality is ultimately very dangerous. So we do what we can. So second, somebody will. If we don't sleep with the enemy, we will be sleeping with another person, right? So again, we will be under the payroll of somebody else. So again, it's kind of choosing your camp. And so, lastly, because of the clearance restrictions of our clients or customers, our relation to them is kind of restricted to the classroom. So it's not so much sleeping, maybe second base, first base, but not really sleeping. Oh, do you have it? Sorry.
Yeah, I don't like this sleeping metaphor, but I'm going to give you this explanation. Iran was invaded by Mongols many years ago. Then we tried to fight them. We couldn't. We taught them Persian. Then we lived in peace. And they became ambassadors of Persian culture and language all over the world. I think we can solve these animosities by just trying to understand, speak each other's languages. So we are not speaking with the enemy. We are speaking with our fiancés.
You wanted to add anything
Yeah, as being the one non-language teacher here on the panel, I might add that in some parts of Canada, my working for an agency here in the U.S. that has the word defense in it would probably get me in some trouble, but I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I'll be frank with you. When we started this program, they did a video. We had a videotape done to describe what we did, and the videotape, they wanted to call it the languages of war, and we wouldn't let them, because it's really the languages of war and peace. That doesn't mean that we're going to eliminate war from the world, but the whole idea here is to we interface with countries all over the world, some countries that aren't necessarily friendly with us. China is not a bad example. It is very productive to have it, to both China and to the United States, to have our people be able to converse and understand the culture of other countries, and as they work on any number of things, be it disaster relief or whatever. Can you imagine? We put so many people through military schools, and back in the 60s in particular, if you were a leader in South America, you'd probably been to a war college or another in the United States of America, and they learned a lot about U.S. culture. Can you imagine the advantage if there is a serious disagreement over various issues that exist out there with China, for example, and some of my good friends and Chinese instructors are sitting here. Can you imagine how much more likely we're going to come to a peaceful resolution of that problem if the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who happens to be talking to his counterpart in China, is able to speak the language and understand the culture, and maybe even have gone to school with him? That is a huge difference. And the other issue I guess I'd bring up is, because we're Americans, we must understand this limitation, and this is what frustrates me. A good number of soldiers, when they're young, when they come to us, if you ask them to describe somebody who was Islamic, for example, they would give you a sentence that would include the term raghead, terrorist, and the F-bomb, all in the same sentence. And that's why you have things like Abu Ghraib and other national tragedies that cost many, many lives, not just American lives. Never, ever, ever do I believe would you have somebody that's been through our program that doesn't just learn the language, that learns the culture. Never, ever, ever would you have a graduate of our program be so insensitive and have such a lack of understanding. And that's one of the things that we're proudest of. Other questions? Do we take care of that? Anybody else have a question? Half of y'all work for us, so I'm probably afraid to ask a question.
My question is for Owen, but I'd appreciate any other comments on it. So I related quite a bit to what you were saying about having people in government who carry a lot of power but are unwilling to listen or to go out and seek for information. I spent some time in Kosovo and worked in the higher education sector there, and in my interactions with the head official of the U.S. Embassy in charge of giving grants and of helping with education, facilitating education things, when I spoke to him about what I was seeing in my interactions with Kosovo Albanians, he specifically said to me, well, I don't read anything outside of the embassy. I only read what is presented to me. And I didn't know what to say. The Albanians have a saying, they say, "Çame bo," and it means what to do. So it's kind of this fatalistic response to everything. And the more that the political situation, well, education was controlled by politics a lot in Kosovo, and the more that that digressed, and even with the current U.S. ambassador in Kosovo, that they appear to be very limited in the information that they are willing to listen to. And so I wondered, given your experience, do you have any suggestions or ideas on what a civilian can do for that?
No, that's a great question. And in brief, my answer would be this. In our government, we have a habit of encouraging generalization, okay? So you'd be, for diplomats, you would go to the Philippines, and then you would go to the Dominican Republic, and then you would go, if you're lucky, to Sweden, right? And maybe people would take exception to this, but my belief is in the professionalism and the expertise in a certain area. And I think that our diplomatic service does itself a great disservice by having that generalist approach. Whereas I think in order to grasp the issues of a region as complicated as the Middle East, for example, you have to know the language. And not just, yep, took my FSI course, I've been to Egypt for 3 years, and that was 10 years ago. You got to build on that expertise, not just use it once.
Did I notice a little about there when you asked that question? Right.
I'm Montanan.
Okay, because I thought maybe that was a soft question from a countryman maybe there when I heard when I heard about. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Asad. I'm from Pakistan. Before I ask question, I'd like to mention that, in Urdu, we speak Urdu in Pakistan, and we also have 2 different words for aunt. We are also kind of closer to our mother side, Just wanted to mention that. And my question is from all the speakers that you all mentioned how much important it is to teach language with culture. But what kind of difficulties or challenges you face when you try to teach culture to your students? Because in my experience, you can't really teach culture. Someone needs to understand it or experience it in order to learn.
Yeah, I get that very well. And let me give a first shot at that, and I'll describe to you, the non-pedagogy part of that. For a normal course, about 13% of the language course is culture and regional studies. That's not because that pedagogically we figured out that made a lot of sense. It's because when you have somebody in a class for 7 hours worrying about vowels and sounds and language, it gets pretty tiring. So we do the culture and regional studies piece in the middle of the day. It's kind of like recess. That they get to actually talk about culture and regional studies. We think it's important for lots of reasons, not the least of which is you can be fluent in Thai, for example, but if you don't know better than to reach over and tousle the hair of your friend's 10-year-old son and then therefore rob his spirit from him in that gesture, it doesn't do you a lot of good to be fluent. So the advantage we have as being part of a university at the University of Montana, one, we have Owen and other people, our faculty who give lectures and presentations, sometimes in their heritage language, depending on the fluency level of the students. But they provide some of the culture and regional studies training. Owen provides a tremendous amount of it. And we reach out to Gigi sitting here in front of us and other faculty at the university, because there's lots of expertise here, to come over and give culture and regional studies training on what I would call the big picture. If you're going to go to Central Southwest Asia, Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever, we think it's important that you understand the water crisis in the Himalayas. If you're going to go to East Asia, we think it's important that you understand the regional impact of displacing 1.5 million people in the next 20 years because of global warming and what those rising sea levels have done in terms of, in Southeast Asia, displacing people from their homes and their means of food production. Those things are all tremendously important, not to mention really, I mean, one of the greatest thrills I ever had in this program, I guess, is this young kid from Mississippi who showed up as a typical guy. You'd think he hated everybody who was Islamic. And before he left, after a 6-month course, about the 5th month, he gave me a little lecture on the 5 pillars of Islam. That was pretty amazing. And he didn't know that I sort of marked him up as one of our great success stories. So it's a huge part of the program. very, very important, and I think we do it pretty well. You're the culture guy, though. Why don't you start?
If someone could remind me of the question again.
Culture issue in regional studies and how we do that in the language and why it's important.
You know, one of the problems that I've seen working with the military on culture specifically is they don't know how to measure it. You know, the military is all about matrix, right? Matrices. You know, they're at this level in language, you know, and we want them at that level in language. But how do you do it with cultural knowledge? How do you do it with cultural competencies? Because there you're dealing with such a large, amorphous mass of information that it's kind of hard to just say, yep, here's your yes-no test on do's and don'ts in a given culture. I mean, that's one way of doing it, but it seems to me that it's also kind of rote learning, and you're missing some of the nuances that you would probably only get once you are actually in the culture and immersed in it.
Anybody else?
So we as an administrator and as a language and culture instructors, we face a lot of challenges in the classrooms when we teach both culture and language, because there are times when a student say, as Don mentioned, well, I don't care what we do in your country. So what we do is we try to provide them a little bit of everything. So we have team teaching approach at DCLCP. For instance, in the case of Afghanistan, Afghanistan is a very complex country, tribal, and it's very different from cities to villages, and it's what part of Afghanistan you're talking about, so it's very complex. So what we do within that team, we try to hire people from different parts of Afghanistan. So we teach culture from native perspective, and we also teach regional studies from American perspective, from anthropologist perspective. We give them a little bit of everything. And we as a native, we don't try to convert them when we teach them the culture. We teach them the culture, how we practice. This is what we practice, and this is why we see things different. And then we let them find their way. And at the end, they walk out very successful, most of them from our classroom. And we had several of our students who went to school and did their master thesis on this culture and language issues they learned at our center.
Just to add something to that, my favorite scene from the Karate Kid movie is when this kid wants to learn karate and his master tells him to go and start washing the windows of the cars. And after like many hours, the guy was like, why is he doing this? But actually it turns out to be actually a very important self-defense posture, which is basically what we do is you don't learn culture in a canned way. You learn it without even feeling it. René Maillot, previous director in UNESCO, says, La science est tout ce qui reste quand on a tout oublié. Science is or knowledge, what remains when we have forgotten everything. It's like when you are learning swimming, or the moment you forget you are riding a bike or swimming, that is when you start swimming and riding the bike.
And I want to be sensitive to the fact that we have another group that's following us here at 1 o'clock. And I would only close with the observation, and we have Dr. Kim in the audience with us, who's the head of the Mansfield Center. We are part of the Mansfield Center. I believe that Mike Mansfield would be immensely proud of this program. And I must admit, as a lifelong Grizzly that learned about the world here way back before most everybody here was born, I am very proud that the University of Montana has stepped up to the plate and provides a service that may not be going to solve all the problem, but it's a step in the right direction. So I want to thank the faculty here and the faculty in the audience for all the contributions they make to the university and our state. Thank you.